There has been several times where I've pulled over to the side of the road because I've seen a bird that I wanted to take a picture of. Safely, always, don't worry, I'm fine. But there have been times I've completely stopped my journey for a minute just to take a picture of a bird. But this is the first time I've done it because I saw a bunch of people with cameras and decided there must be birds about. No regrets, always do that. Follow the guys with cameras. The cave swallow is a locally common bird found in southeastern New Mexico, Texas, Florida, the Greater Antilles, and parts of Mexico. And while many of their populations stay in one place year-round, U.S. birds usually migrate south for the winter. A lot of U.S. humans do that as well, particularly where I'm from. True to its name, it usually roosts in caves, often alongside bats, although they have gotten more used to using man-made structures, including sinkholes, bridges, culverts, and even some ancient ruins. And this has actually allowed them to expand their territories both in Texas and Florida. Territories? I think I mean range. I don't think they're a very territorial bird, except maybe just around their nest. 4 inches of territory. They build their nests out of mud and they're usually attached very high on cave walls, hence seeing them near bats often. And this has actually caused there to be limited data on their nesting because they're hard to get to. You can climb a tree, can't climb a cave, I guess. Their nest shapes vary, although basically they always look like a little cup or a bowl. The females are the ones that mostly do the incubation, and both parents will feed the chicks. And northern populations will often actually raise 2 or 3 broods per season. The cave swallow is a medium-sized monomorphic... That's the word. The cave swallow is a medium-sized monomorphic swallow, so the males and the females look alike. So they all have dark wings and a dark tail, white streaks on their upper back, which is blue-tinged, a buff rump and throat, and mostly pale underparts. Although the underparts can vary from gray to tawny, depending on which subspecies you're looking at. And their forehead is a deep cinnamon color. And so they all... Penny! Sky! 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 They look pretty similar to cliff swallows. I mean, they look pretty similar to swallows generally, but the thing that you can tell different about swallows is usually their color, which is only a little bit different between the cave swallows and the cliff swallows. With the cave swallow having a pale throat, with the cliff swallow having a darker one. Their sides and rump are both a little bit richer than the cliff swallows, and they've got a pale face with a black cap, whereas the cliff swallow's head is completely dark. And the juveniles of both species are very hard to tell apart because when they're young, their markings are less distinct. They vary a lot from individual to individual, so it's hard to tell, okay? They also sound basically the same, with just the cave swallows having a higher pitched voice and they use it more frequently, as if we're supposed to be able to tell that from afar. The juvenile cave swallows are much duller than adults, which is kind of common in juveniles, with a less metallic sheen and a paler cinnamon collar, with more variable white markings on their foreheads. And it is hypothesized that the different markings among juveniles help parents pick out their young in crowded colonies, because they're a very colonial bird. I feel like there's got to be a Gary Larson cartoon about that. They've got a complex basic molt strategy, but they sort of just always look the same, at least to me. Some birds have a very large difference between their several plumages that they molt through. These guys don't. Sorry. They have 5 recognized subspecies, and the biggest difference amongst them is their size, with the biggest of them being the Southwest US and Northern Canadian. Northern Canadian? With the largest among them being the Southwestern US and Northern Mexican population. No, I'm not going to try to say all the names. No. And despite the fact that these subspecies are visibly different, genetic studies have shown gene flow amongst a couple of them, which suggests only partial isolation among the subspecies. These guys belong to the family Hirundinidae, which are the swallows and the martins. And I actually spent a little bit of time trying to sort out the historical changes of their genus. No. I didn't manage it. Within the swallow and martin family, there was a lot of debate about the genuses that different birds fell into. And while I could certainly sit here and sort it out, there seemed to be nothing particularly interesting in the end. They all are related to one another. They're all swallows and martins. Yeah, It has been noted to sometimes hybridize with the cliff swallow and the barn swallow, but these are rare and it is unclear how fit they are, whether they could have offspring of their own. While their population isn't particularly small, they do have a fairly small area in which they live. They are a very equatorial bird. But they do have vagrant flocks, which is how I saw them. And their range has actually been expanding northward over the past century, with records of them not really appearing in the US until the late 19th and the early 20th centuries. And while in the US, they only really live and breed in the very southern states, vagrants have been recorded all the way up through southeastern Canada. So when I said Canada instead of earlier Mexico, Mexico, wasn't as wrong as you thought. And it seems these vagrants are likely due to expanding populations and happenstance favorable weather conditions. It is also quite likely that their general northward expansion is greatly helped by their ability to breed in man-made structures. And while they use these man-made structures, they really still are a cave bird. And so when they do pick an artificial structure to nest in, they still prefer a dimly lit environment like a cave's twilight zone, which is where they typically live in non-man-made structures. Yes, they always breed in Rod Serling's world, not ours. And they usually forage during the day nearby their nest, often close to open water. During migration, they often forage over open landscapes and will roost near their breeding site before departure. In New Mexico, it's noted they often roost in sorghum fields and will forage up to 10 kilometers from their nesting site. For most of the subspecies, their wintering habitat is not super well known, although resident populations really just stay in their breeding habitat. So generally, their migration is messy and not well understood by us. Someone should research that. After breeding, they tend to spend more time away from the nesting sites and gradually disperse and forage widely. Young birds typically migrate first, and some adults will move between colonies before dispersing. And in wintering areas like El Salvador, they form large communal roosts, from 5,000 to 8,000 birds, usually in sorghum and sugarcane fields. And before sunset, flocks will circle above the fields and then descend quietly in small groups to roost, which is likely a behavior to avoid predators. They all want to do that, always. And their roost sites often shift as crops are harvested throughout the season. So whatever you're growing now, the cave swallows will be there. As you might have guessed from the fact that they are swallows, their diet is basically just flying insects, which includes grasshoppers, beetles, flies, moths, wasps, bees, ants, and other small airborne arthropods. They usually forage in open areas, often along cliff faces and open water, or over water, at heights up to 100 meters. And they feed in loose flocks throughout the day, often in early morning and late afternoon. I don't think they're actually crepuscular, but if you're looking for them, you might as well consider them such. And while they usually just sort of swoop around, they do sometimes have creative foraging techniques, such as flushing moths from flowering trees. And they're very social foragers, so nesting colonies are often considered information centers, where others will observe and follow individuals to good feeding areas, with feeding flocks often forming near cave entrances and then going to the larger feeding area farther away. And they're opportunistic feeders. There's no evidence that they store food anywhere. And they drink water in flight by skimming the water and then lifting their head up to swallow it. And even though I've just explained all of this, I want to say that they are an aerial insectivore because it's fun to say. They are a highly vocal bird, yay me, particularly around their nesting sites, and they're used for all sorts of communication purposes. Courtship, nest establishment, warning calls for predators, you know, the works. And if a colony is disturbed at night, it will sometimes start to chatter. And most of their chattering calls really do seem to be for social interactions around the colonies. And they also have some fluttering non-vocal sounds made by their wings, and it is hypothesized that it helps them navigate cave walls in darkness. These guys rarely walk at all, basically only on the rims of their nests or when they're collecting mud for said nests. And they can't really climb, but they do cling to the walls of caves, using their tail and wings for balance sometimes. But flying's really where they're happy. They are a very acrobatic and agile flyer, and being a cave-dwelling bird can maneuver in tight spaces pretty well. And they have been known to parachute into sinkholes and spiral upward to exit them, which is too cute. And they also seem to be great at locating nests in low light. Again, cave dweller. As they live in dense colonies, there is some competition for nests and materials, with birds known to defend their nests by briefly chasing others, although their threat and appeasement behaviors are not well documented. But they don't seem to be a particularly mean bird. And colony sizes can vary from 10 to 3,000 pairs. I gotta go in more caves. I like bats too. They're not birds, but I still like them. You know the phrase, birds of a feather stick together? Well, these guys also stick with birds that look nothing like them. They'll roost with all sorts of other swallows, also some martins, some sparrows, some phoebes, and of course they'll hang out with bats happily. And it is noted that in caves, particularly with bats, minor collisions can occur, but are rarely fatal. That's not funny. It's not funny. A bat and a bird crashing into one another in the middle of a cave is not funny. They got a fair number of predators. They're kind of little bird. They got predators. Many owls and many falcons will go after them, and some mammals and some reptiles will get at their nests too if they can. These guys will often reuse their nests over multiple years, and their nests can get higher than even 35 meters off the ground. And though their nests are basically made of mud, they do line their nests with different plant materials. And the territories of individual birds is very small. It's basically confined to the immediate nest area. And nest density varies depending on where the nests are. They're more spread out in caves and more densely packed under man-made structures. And their nests can last several years, particularly in caves. Both mates in a pair will help to build the nest, and they will often refurbish used nests in the spring if they're going to use them again. A clutch size for these guys is typically 3 to 5 eggs. They hatch mainly in the mid-morning, which is oddly specific for a bird, at least I think so. And the young are altricial and nidicolous. Yes, that's a word, and it just means that they stay in the nest for a long time after they hatch. They fledge at day 20 to 22, although it can sometimes take up to day 26. And it is noted that the young freeze when they're handled and will try to retreat into darker areas, which is so cute. Once they do fledge, they initially stay near the nest or near cave recesses, and the parents will keep feeding the young at nearby locations. And young will often congregate together in safe sites. And as I mentioned earlier, they do sometimes have several clutches in a season, and the success of the first clutch is likely to be higher than the success of following clutches. Like most birds, they have a very high first-year mortality rate, and that goes down after their first year. And the average lifespan of these guys is 2.7 years, with the oldest recorded being over 9 years old. So not only was I not looking for cave swallows the day I found them, I was not looking for birds at all. I was driving along in my car. I don't even remember where I was going at this point. And I just happened to be driving along the coast of Lake Ontario when I saw a bunch of guys parked in a parking lot off the side of the road that I was driving on, holding cameras. And I noticed there was some sort of bird that was flying around that they were looking at. It was pretty obvious that they were swallows. Swallows have that very distinct flying pattern. I'm not quite sure how to describe it. They've got very arched wings, and you can tell pretty easily if you're used to it that something's a swallow. So, of course, because I had my camera with me, don't go anywhere without it, I decided to also pull over and try to figure out what they were looking at. I didn't go right next to them because I'm shy, but I spent some time looking around trying to figure out what they were. I set up my video camera too because one of the things about swallows is it's really hard to take a picture of them. They go really fast. You're almost certainly pointing your camera up vaguely towards the sun, so they're very often backlit. So I was trying to figure out what they were, but I was not having a ton of luck. As it happened, another guy did exactly what I did. He pulled over because he saw a bunch of people taking pictures, and he came up to me and asked me what they were, and I said, they're a swallow, but I don't know. And so he walked over and asked the people smarter than me what they were, and they told him they were cave swallows. And then he came back and told me because he was a sweetheart. Thank you, random stranger. This is a very vagrant flock for cave swallows. I'm in upstate New York, not Southern Texas. So what precisely they were doing up here, I do not quite know. A little later, one of the guys from the original photography group came over to me. They had all gotten together because of a local Discord that was tracking birds. Yay for the internet. He asked me if that's why I showed up. I said, no, I'm just a weirdo who pulled over to the side of the road because I saw people with cameras. But he told me all he knew about them. He told me that they were probably sort of blown off their course by good weather at that particular moment. And people had been tracking them and tracking where this little flock had been going. And so there were reports and people showed up to see them. I am so happy that they were there because I would have never known that they were cave swallows otherwise, because these are the pictures I got. Luckily for me, I did also have my video camera with me. I don't think that's luck. I think that's me being neurotic. But so I was able to capture them flying around in their flock, being aerial insectivores, which is often the very impressive thing about swallows, is seeing them all together at once, catching things, because they're very good at it. But I'm so glad this guy was there to tell me that they were cave swallows. I was never going to know otherwise. And now I know all about them. So yay. I didn't know anything about these birds when I first saw them. I know a little bit more now. Don't trust me to know what I'm talking about? I don't. I'm just a girl who pulled over to the side of the road because there were people with cameras and birds flying in the sky. I don't know how anybody's ever gotten a photo of these guys. They fly around like little boomerangs. Wasn't gonna happen for me.